My name is Amanda. I'm 29 years old and I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm the second born in a pair of twins, arriving just 11 minutes after my sister Isabel. But to our parents, those 11 minutes were enough to crown her as the family's miracle, while I was just the shadow that followed. Since I was little, I've heard my mom proudly tell stories about Isabel's birth, how they waited so long to have children, how Isabel was a gift from God, a light in their darkest years. I, on the other hand, was born just minutes later, unexpected, almost unplanned. No one ever said it outright, but their eyes, the way they spoke of her with affection and offered me only a polite smile, told me everything I needed to know about my place. The difference was clear from kindergarten. In our first school play, I was Little Red Riding Hood in the starring role, and Isabel played a shrub on the side of the stage. But minutes before showtime, she started crying because she'd torn a corner of her costume. My parents rushed on stage to comfort her and missed my entire performance. Afterward, when I eagerly gave my mom a picture I'd drawn, she just patted my head and turned to praise Isabel for being brave enough to stand on stage even without much of a part. In elementary school, I poured myself into every test, always aiming for the top of the class. I joined the science club and did a solar energy project I was genuinely passionate about. When I brought home a first-place district medal, my dad glanced at it and asked Isabel if she had a good day at school. She said some kids teased her for wearing mismatched socks, and suddenly the whole conversation shifted to Isabel's emotional trauma. Still, I kept trying. In high school, I joined the debate team, competed statewide, and won the highest award in 10th grade. Isabel often skipped school because she felt overwhelmed by homework. Her grades were average at best, but my parents praised her artistic talent because she painted a few romantic watercolors and knew 3 guitar chords. I once told them I painted too and had sold artwork online, but they just smiled and said, "Don't compare yourself to your sister." What hurt the most wasn't the praise for Isabel. It was how they casually dismissed all my efforts. When I got accepted into the honors program, they said, "Amanda works too hard. She's going to burn out someday." Isabel got a C on her history test, and my mom comforted her. "A C is fine. Not everyone has to be good at everything." I was stunned into silence. One time, I won a scholarship to a Stanford summer program. My dad asked just one question: "Did Isabel get in too?" When I said no, he sighed in disappointment. I've lost count of how many nights I went to sleep with a hollow feeling, tears quietly soaking my pillow, wondering what I'd done wrong, when all I ever did was try to be a good daughter. As I got older, I saw more clearly that my role in the family wasn't to be loved, but to be the backdrop against which my sister could shine. I was expected to be understanding, to endure, to yield, because she's more sensitive than you. But who was ever gentle with me? I used to believe that if I was good enough, my parents would finally see me. But it turns out, there are invisible walls made of names, birth order, and misplaced expectations. Walls that no amount of effort could break through. I grew up in a house where love was distributed according to a scale I never had a chance to touch. And to this day, I still wonder, if I had been born those 11 minutes earlier, would everything have been different? I still remember that fateful Christmas Eve, cold, snowflakes drifting past the wooden window frames of our family home in Boise, Idaho. I had just finished my sophomore year of college with a near-perfect GPA. I didn't get the fanfare Isabel did when she debuted an abstract painting at a local gallery, but I still tried to keep a cheerful spirit as I came home for the holidays. That dinner, we all sat around the table with roast meat my mom had prepared. Everything seemed normal until my uncle, Richard, my dad's younger brother, raised his glass and chuckled as he brought up our birth story. Well, Tom and his wife were so shocked when the doctor said it was twins, they only planned to have one after all. I paused, knife in hand, mid-splice of a potato. I looked up and met his eyes. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice wavering. Uncle Richard looked a bit uncomfortable but kept smiling. "Oh, yeah. Isabel was planned and you were..." a little surprise. No one was prepared for two at once. The table fell silent. My mom gently touched his arm and quickly changed the subject, but I didn't hear a word after that. All I could hear was the echo in my head. Only planned for one. Isabel was the plan. Everything became crystal clear, like someone had flipped a switch and illuminated every memory from nearly 20 years in that house. I no longer needed to wonder why I always felt forgotten. The reason was so simple and so cruel, it made my chest tighten. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my old bed, staring at the ceiling, reflecting on my entire life. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. I no longer craved my parents' approval. I no longer wanted to make anyone proud. Except myself. After the holiday, I returned to college with a completely different energy. I stopped calling my mom when I aced a programming test. I stopped sending pictures of awards. Instead, I channeled everything into building my skills. And more importantly, building a life for myself. I earned a full scholarship to the computer science program at the University of Washington. I studied hard and enrolled in extra courses: artificial intelligence, machine learning, system security. I was no longer living in Isabel's shadow. I was starting to create my own light. After graduation, I was recruited by a young tech startup in Seattle called Nurix Labs. No one in my family asked about my new job, but I wasn't hurt. I knew my worth, and that was enough. 3 years later, Nurix was thriving, valued at hundreds of millions after a successful Series C funding round. I went from software engineer to team lead, and eventually, at 27, was promoted to director of software development. In a tech magazine interview, I was called the Heart of Nurix. I printed the article and quietly pinned it on my office wall. Not as the older daughter, not with anyone's permission, just as me. I bought a small apartment downtown and decorated it myself with a minimalist touch. Simple, clean, full of freedom. Every morning, as I stood by the window and watched the city wake up, I knew I was living a life I chose. No one had paved the path. No one got to define me. Isabel still regularly updates social media with photos from gallery shows and tea parties with her artist friends. My parents still interact, share, and comment with pride. I don't feel resentment anymore. I just no longer feel the need to squeeze myself into a family portrait that only ever had one subject. Now, I've learned that some wounds never heal, but we can learn to live without letting them define us. I'm not a shadow, I am me. With scars, with achievements, with everything I've overcome. And I know the next chapter of my life is only just beginning. I've always believed that if anyone in the family truly saw me, it was my grandmother, Grandma June. She was the only one who never called Isabel sweetheart in every sentence. To her, we were two individuals, not two parts of a comparison. Every summer, she would take us to her old farm in Bend, Oregon. There, I could shed the label of Isabel's little sister and simply be Amanda, the girl who loved reading under the pecan tree, who quietly listened to her grandmother's stories of youth. When I was in my final year of college, she fell ill. It wasn't a violent illness, but a lingering one, as if time itself was trying to keep her with me a little longer. Before she passed, she called me to her bedside, held my hand, and said softly, "Amanda, I know you've endured things no one has acknowledged. I can't change the past, but I can do something small for your future." She told me she'd set aside a savings account in her will for both of us, for our weddings, split evenly, not to be touched by anyone else. She emphasized that she wanted her youngest granddaughter to have something truly her own, not shared, not taken. I cried, not because of the money, but because after all those years, someone finally acknowledged my pain was real. The money was placed in a joint trust under both our names, temporarily managed by our parents until we got married. I didn't think much of it. I knew I wasn't planning on a wedding anytime soon. Isabel was different. After meeting Evan, a tall lawyer with smooth talk and perfectly pressed shirts, she declared he was the one. 3 months later, they were engaged. A month after that, the whole family was swept up in wedding planning. I received a gold-trimmed invitation at my office with my name printed in a flowery font. Mrs. Amanda is cordially invited to the wedding of Isabel and Evan at Silver Oaks Estate, Napa Valley. Alongside it was a lengthy guest list, a gourmet European menu, and a photo album from their Santorini engagement shoot. I blinked. Where did they get the money for all this? I didn't want to be suspicious, but something didn't feel right. I called my mom and asked her directly. She hesitated for a second, then quickly slipped into her usual sweet tone. "Oh, I meant to tell you after the wedding so things wouldn't get complicated. Isabel needed your share of the wedding fund." "And you're not planning anything soon, right?" I froze at my desk. "What do you mean?" "Grandma made it very clear. That was mine." My mom laughed softly, as if I was being unreasonable. "Oh, Amanda, you don't need a fancy wedding. A girl like you getting married? I think that money should go to someone who really needs it. Your sister is starting a family after all." My heart pounded in heavy beats. "It's not about the money, it's about respect. It was Grandma's decision. It was the only thing in my life I knew was meant just for me." My dad chimed in from the other room, voice flat. "You have a career, money, a home. Isabel needs a new beginning, and well, you don't seem too interested in marriage. Don't blow this out of proportion." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt an emptiness spreading inside me like slow smoke. I hung up and stared blankly at my computer screen. The presentation I was working on suddenly meant nothing. It felt like a part of me had just been crushed by betrayal from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. They had taken the one thing Grandma left me, a quiet acknowledgement, a subtle act of restoration, and decided it belonged to Isabel because she deserved it more. And once again, I was pushed aside, as if I had never truly been a part of this family. I had always stayed silent, always given in. But this time I knew things would never be the same again. I sat in my small apartment in Capitol Hill, Seattle, sunlight spilling across my desk and onto the computer screen. My inbox was open. The cursor blinked at the end of the message. Every word I had typed felt like a cut into my own memories. Not because it hurt, but because I was finally strong enough to stop. "I know about the wedding fund. I know you used my share to pay for Isabel's wedding without asking. This isn't just about money, it's about the lack of respect that's existed since I was a child and still continues today. I'm no longer trying to be seen or loved. Don't contact me unless it's to return what belongs to me, Amanda." I read it 3 times, not a single word extra, no apology. Then I hit send. After that, I opened my contacts and deleted one number at a time. Dad, Mom, Isabel. No shaking hands, no hesitation. Then I moved on to social media, blocking anyone who might become a bridge for excuses to find their way back to me. I no longer had the energy for phrases like, "They're still your parents," or, "Come on, your sisters, don't make it a big deal." It was time I chose peace, not agreement, in pain. That night, I started something I once thought I didn't need: therapy. I found a therapist named Clara Monroe who specialized in working with adult women carrying childhood wounds. In our first session, I sat across from her in silence, for a long time before finally speaking. "I don't even know what I'm feeling. I'm so tired." Clara didn't interrupt. She just nodded and said one sentence that nearly made me cry. "We don't have to be strong for 29 years just to earn rest." Each session after that, I slowly unfolded memories I had carefully tucked away and buried deep. I began to look at my childhood with different eyes, clear, without blame toward myself. I no longer saw myself as too sensitive, like my mother used to say. I was just a child who hadn't been loved the way she deserved. A few months later, I found a small craftsman-style house in West Seattle. It had a backyard, olive green walls, and a porch just wide enough for afternoon reading on the weekends. When I signed the contract, I didn't call home to share the news. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore. I decorated the house in my own way, simple but warm. No family photos. Instead, pictures of me with my friends from work, the people I now consider my real family. There was Jillian, my best friend from college, who helped me move and brought homemade cookies. Luis, a coworker who could read me with just a glance, and Marianne, the older neighbor who always brought me orange marmalade when she saw I came home late. These people weren't related by blood, but they remembered my birthday, listened without comparing me to anyone, and never made me feel like I was second best. One autumn evening, I sat in the living room, wrapped in a charcoal gray blanket, holding a cup of hot mint tea. It was drizzling outside. I opened my laptop and wrote in my journal, a new habit since starting therapy. I'm living a life that needs no explanation. I'm not a copy of anyone. No longer a shadow. No longer a backup plan. I am Amanda. And just then, my phone lit up. Isabel was calling. I stared at the screen. Her name appeared with a glowing beach wedding photo as the profile picture. A part of me hesitated. But then, I took a deep breath and hit decline. After that, I went into the block settings and added her name. For good this time. I don't know if they'll ever feel remorse. I don't need to know. What I do know is, for the first time in my life, I stood up and chose myself. And no one can take that away from me now. 2 years have passed since the day I sent that final email to my parents. In that time, I've lived a life I once only dreamed of. Peaceful, purposeful, and no longer weighed down by invisible expectations. I was promoted to Director of Development at Nurix Labs the day I turned 30. The company's stock surged after a successful IPO, and I now had the financial means to begin expanding our engineering team internationally. It was all my achievement, owed to no one, dependent on no one. Then one September afternoon, during a strategy meeting with the executive team, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was Uncle Alan, my mother's younger brother. We rarely spoke, so I had a sinking feeling something was wrong. I excused myself and answered, "Sweetheart, it's me." His voice was thick with emotion. "Your parents, they were in a car accident. A pickup ran a red light and hit them at the old church intersection. It's not looking good." I gripped the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. "How are they now?" "Your dad's in critical condition. Internal bleeding. The doctors say he needs emergency surgery. Your mom has fractured ribs and a broken wrist. They still don't have health insurance, Amanda, and the bills are piling up." I don't remember what I said next, just that I couldn't focus on the rest of the meeting. That entire evening, I sat on the couch under the soft yellow light, my thoughts tangled like a knotted string. I'm not heartless. Despite the broken relationship, I still remembered the sound of my mother's laughter reading me fairy tales, and my father's rough but steady hands teaching me to ride a bike. But I also remembered the countless moments they abandoned me when they should have been there, and most recently, how they took what was rightfully mine without even asking. The next day, I got a message from Isabel. Long, formal, full of words like conscience, family, forgiveness, but it all led to one sweetened plea. "Amanda, I know I was wrong, but this time our parents really need you. Evan and we can't afford the hospital bills. This is your chance to prove you're the bigger person, the good daughter." I didn't reply. A day later, my mother called. Before I could decline the call, I heard her faint voice. "Amanda, I know I haven't always been right, but now, your father needs surgery. We don't have much time. You're the only one who can help." I closed my eyes. That voice once lulled me to sleep, but today it no longer brought warmth. Instead, it triggered a reel of memories, of being pushed aside again and again. And again, I set the phone down, turned on speaker, and said, softly but firmly, "I'm not this family's bank." Silence hung on the other end. Then my father's voice broke in. "We're family, Amanda. Family helps each other." I let out a short laugh, bitter, almost hollow. Then where was family when you used my inheritance for Isabel's wedding? When you missed my graduation because you were helping her pick out curtains? Where was family then? My mom started crying. But this time, I didn't waver. I'm not blaming you for the accident, but I'm also not obligated to pay for every mistake you've made. If you need help, ask the person who's been prioritized for 30 years. I ended the call. There was no anger, just a cold clarity. I knew I'd be judged. I knew relatives might turn on me. But I also knew I couldn't back down this time. That night, I made an anonymous donation to the hospital through a regional medical relief fund. Just enough so their treatment wouldn't be cut off, but with no trace linking it to me. I didn't do it because they deserved it. I did it so I wouldn't owe myself anything. That evening, I returned from a partner meeting in Bellevue. A light rain had started falling in Seattle, fog curling around the porch. I took off my coat and was just about to make myself a cup of tea when the doorbell rang. No warning, no message. I glanced at the doorbell camera screen. Isabel. Her blonde hair perfectly curled, makeup flawless like she'd just stepped out of a magazine shoot. In her hand was a Hermes Birkin bag, the kind that costs more than the car I drove in college. I didn't need to open the door to know why she was here. I opened the door, standing in the entryway, my voice calm but unwelcoming. "What are you doing here?" Isabel forced a tight smile, trying to appear casual. "We need to talk. Do you have a few minutes?" I stepped aside, not out of courtesy, but because I wanted to get this over with quickly. Isabel walked in, her eyes scanning my apartment, the one she once mocked as lifeless for lacking artwork or warm colors. "Your place? Still as cold as your personality, huh?" She gave a soft laugh, placing her bag on the armchair. I didn't respond. I simply sat across from her. "Go ahead. I'm not in the mood for more excuses." Isabel took a deep breath and began, voice steady. "Mom and Dad are really on the edge, Amanda. I know. We have a complicated past, but this isn't the time to hold grudges. They need surgery, physical therapy. You have the means. You could save them." I tilted my head, keeping my eyes fixed on hers. "What about you? Why aren't you helping?" She looked away briefly, then replied slowly. "James doesn't want to get involved. He just invested in a big project and, you know, you're financially independent, but I let out a soft, biting laugh. "You can't touch your husband's account, but you had no problem spending my money on your wedding." Isabel flushed, but tried to keep her composure. "That's in the past, Amanda." I stood up, walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and turned the screen toward her. "You want to know if I could help? Here's what I'm holding. My account balances, company shares, investment returns. I could pay for all their medical expenses without blinking. But I won't." Isabel stared at the numbers on the screen, her face going pale. I closed the laptop, my voice lower. Not because I hate them, but because this is the result of decades of bad choices, made by them and by you. "I was just doing what Mom and Dad taught me," Isabel mumbled. "You've always tried to separate yourself from the family." I narrowed my eyes. "No, I just wanted to be seen as a person, not a shadow." Isabel stood, her voice starting to shake. "So, this is your revenge? Letting them lose everything?" I paused for a moment, then said, "It's not revenge. It's breaking out of a toxic cycle. They taught you that my existence was a mistake. Now they need me. But I'm not the backup plan anymore." She walked toward the door, clutching her luxury bag like it was the last shred of dignity she had left. Before stepping out, she turned and said softly, "You'll regret this when they're gone." I answered, calmer than ever. "What I regret is spending so many years trying to become someone they never wanted." The door closed behind her. I sat down and poured myself a glass of red wine I had aged since last month. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, I felt no turmoil, no anger, no regret. Less than a week after the tense encounter with Isabel, the family group chat suddenly came back to life after 2 years of silence. The instigator was Aunt Linda, my mom's younger sister. Her first message was a long paragraph filled with exclamation points. "Amanda, I can't believe you could be so cold. Your parents raised you, paid for your education, and now you turn your back on them over some past disagreement?" Immediately, messages from other relatives poured in, like everyone was racing to judge me. Some called me ungrateful. Others said I was using success as an excuse to look down on family. Even a cousin I'd barely spoken 3 words to jumped in. No matter what happened, you don't abandon your parents in a crisis. Family is everything. I read each message, completely unmoved. Instead, I opened a folder I had prepared in advance. In it were scanned copies of Grandma's inheritance papers, clearly stating the wedding fund was to be split evenly between me and Isabel. I included bank statements showing the money was withdrawn just weeks before her wedding. I also attached a screenshot of a message Isabel had sent me. "I know I used your share, but I promise I'll pay it back after the wedding. It's just not the right time, now." And finally, I included a financial breakdown. Not to brag, but to show that I could help. I simply chose not to, because I had been hurt for too long and didn't want to continue the cycle. I sent it all to the group chat, with no explanation. No one said a word for 3 days. The once bussy chat fell silent like a room with the lights switched off. On the 4th evening, one person responded. Andrew, my uncle's oldest son, the only one in the family who went to the same university as me. He sent just one line. "You really did it. Proud of you." I stared at the screen. A strange warmth crept in through the tension of the past days. Sometimes, one person understanding you is enough. After the group chat went quiet, I knew I had reached the end of the old chapter. I opened a real estate app and listed my Seattle apartment for sale, the place I once thought would be my first true home. But now, it was just a memory. I needed a fresh start, untainted by past wounds. 3 weeks later, the apartment sold for more than expected. With that money, plus steadily rising shares from the company, I accepted the offer to transfer to Nurix Labs' new branch in Austin, Texas. A vibrant, fast-growing city in the tech world, and more importantly, a place with no painful memories. The morning of my move, I stood in the empty apartment, autumn sunlight filtering through the curtains. I took one last look around, my hand brushing the arm of the chair where I'd spent nights writing development plans for my team. I didn't cry. I smiled. That afternoon, I boarded a direct flight to Austin. My suitcase wasn't heavy, just a few clothes, my laptop, and an old book from my grandmother I always kept with me. Everything else was new. New job, new apartment, and a life entirely of my own making. The apartment in Austin was a compact penthouse, but with a wide balcony overlooking Lady Bird Lake. That first night, I played some soft jazz, poured a glass of white wine, and opened the windows to let the evening breeze in. I no longer heard my mother's voice in my head, no longer saw my father's critical gaze or Isabel's smug smile. Instead, I heard my own laughter, echoing in a space that belonged to no one else. I had chosen freedom, and this time, I wasn't looking back. From a child seen as a shadow, I had stepped into my own light. I no longer sought approval from those who never truly loved me. Now, I live a life I chose. No permission needed, no strings attached. What I've been through didn't make me bitter. It made me strong, clear-eyed, and firm in knowing my worth. Family isn't where you're born. It's where you're respected and uplifted. And I've finally found that place, starting with myself.